Welcome to the Voice of East Turkistan podcast program. This program is hosted by Center for East Turkistan National Interest. I am Berkel Berlik. On December 8, 2024, autocratic Bashar al-Assad regime in Syria collapsed during a major offensive by opposition forces. The offensive was spearheaded by Tahrir al-Sham and supported mainly by Turkish-backed Syrian National Army. That is good news for the world, and thousands are freed from Assad regime. However, for the people of East Turkestan, gaining freedom has become extremely challenging since Chinese oppressive colonial regime is stronger than ever in East Turkestan. Today we will discuss Assad regime in Syria versus Chinese colonial regime in East Turkestan with Mrs. Rukia Turdush. Hello, Mrs. Rukia Turdush. Thank you for joining us again.
Thank you for you as well.
The world is currently celebrating the fall of Assad regime. As an Uyghur and expert researcher on China's colonial policies in East Turkestan, how would you compare the Assad regime in Syria with the Chinese regime in East Turkestan?
Yes, both of these regimes have similarity and differences. For example, their target is different. The Assad regime favoring the Alevi minorities, the Assadist sect, while they oppress Sunni majority. The both regime target specific ethnic or religious groups, seeing them as a threat to their regime control. The difference is here that China has colonized East Turkestan and that they are targeting the Uyghur and other Turkic peoples who are the rightful owner of the region. And both regimes' oppressive tactics are pretty similar. The Assad regime, for example, used harsh authoritarian control through military force, secret police to oppress political opposition. And following the Syrian civil war, Assad bombed civilians to regain its control, resulting in significant destruction and mass civilian casualties. Even though China did not used chemical attack and the bombing Uyghur civilians in East Turkestan front of the world. However, they have used more covert method. They used secret police, digital surveillance against Uyghur civilians. They used the PLA and the Chinese Civil Army. PLA is People's Liberation Army. The Chinese Civil Army is Bingtuan Chinese Construction Corps. Is there to play active role to oppress Uyghurs. And the Chinese government used these military forces, attack Uyghurs each time when they uprised against the Chinese regime. And China's genocidal policies such as mass detention also very similar to Assad's regime. And besides, China is implementing forced labor, removing Uyghur children from their home. Additionally, they ban religion, erasing cultural identity and promoting Sinicization and forcing Uyghurs to transform into become Chinese. Recently, we have seen that that shocking reality of Sednaya prison in Syria. And that prison exposed inhuman torture conducted by Assad regime. It has huge similarity to Chinese regime in East Turkestan. We have mounted evidence of shocking Chinese torture methods in re-education camps, detention camps, and the prisons. And another similarity is China is implementing settler colonialism, detained millions of Uyghurs and replaced them with a large-scale Han Chinese settler migrated from China. The Assad regime also displaced population in opposition resided areas and resettled loyalists to harden its control.
You just talked about similarity of torture methods and mass imprisonment. Could you talk more about this similarity?
China detained millions of people in Chinese underground prisons and water prisons. That will be shock the world if those prisoners will expose. Like Syrians, thousands of Uyghurs still has no idea whereabouts or what happens to their family members. like Syrian massive graveyards. Since 2017, China established graveyards and the crematories beside its two re-education camps and prisons. Muslims are killed and their bodies were secretly burned in those crematories. Chinese government built those crematories throughout the region, and it was confirmed by Radio Free Asia in 2018. So this news is true. They have burned deceased Uyghur prisoners to erase the traces of secret mass killings in prison and the re-education camps. Also, most of the graveyards of Muslims were previously built were destroyed with bulldozers. If one day Chinese colonialism in East Turkestan is overthrown and the Uyghurs able to look for their family members, still they may not able to find their family members' graveyards since most of them are burned and destroyed.
How did the world respond to these two autocratic regimes, and what should we learn?
International response to these two regimes' repression are very, very different. The Syrian government's oppression have led to widespread international condemnation, including sanctions from the Western countries and calls for accountability for war crimes. Of course, Assad gained from support from his key allies like Russia and Iran. But finally, rebel groups backed by Turkey overthrown the regime in Syria, and currently several countries, including England and Qatar, financially supporting reconstruction of Syria. I would like to say something very important here. It's related to East Turkestanian people. Uyghurs who escaped from Chinese regime in East Turkestan and end up in Syrian war zones before established its own military unit over there, and they also helped overthrow Assad regime. I can say this is a response from East Turkestanian people to Assad regime, and that shows how East Turkestanian people against all oppressors. International response to Chinese regime is not strong as response to Assad regime, although China faces significant diplomatic criticism from its genocide in East Turkestan, particularly from the US, European Union, and human rights organizations. However, Beijing is using its economic influence and strategic alliances, silence criticism of many countries, and many countries remain silent because of their trade or political or economic concerns. The right now situation for East Turkestan is very, very difficult, and East Turkestanian people are suffering under very harsh genocidal Chinese regime. It may seem difficult, but we can't ignore the fact that opportunities will come to challenge and overthrow the Chinese regime one day. History shows us that the more oppressive and unjust a regime is, the faster it tends to collapse, like Assad regime. East Turkestanian people around the world should work hard and united and revival from this hopeless situation against China. I truly hope that East Turkestanian Islamic military units, Islamic parties military units in Syria can find a way to legitimize their position and to play their part in bringing down another oppressive regime, China's regime.
Could you tell me, please, what we should learn or what the world should learn from this regime collapse?
World have seen and witnessed that Sednia prison and the massive graveyards in Syria expose how autocratic regime is sucking blood of ordinary citizens, civilians, and why regime change or overthrown those kind of autocratic regime is extremely important in this world. However, American efforts to regime change in peaceful way is failed, and China is one of the vivid example for that. China gathered those autocratic countries right now as a close ally against the regime change and under the banner of non-interference internal affairs, so they can cover their regime's inhuman crime in their controlled territory. We know that China is the most autocratic regime, and unlike other regimes, it has ambition to control the whole world. They already have colonized East Turkestan, Tibet, and Mongolia. And it's a very dangerous regime. That's why world should not neglect Chinese regime and the Chinese expansion, and should not be manipulated by Chinese economic incentives.
Thank you again, Mrs. Rakira Turdush, for joining us, and a huge thank you to all our listeners for tuning today's discussion. Stay tuned, take care, and we'll see you next time.